The first-class cabin of Aura Airlines Flight 715 from New York to London was a sanctuary of polished leather and hushed tones until Captain Mitchell Graves, a man with silver-streaked hair and a chest full of medals, decided to play judge and jury. With a smirk, he tore the ID of a young black woman in half, the sound cracking through the cabin like a gunshot. The other passengers froze their champagne flutes, hovering mid-sip. "Enjoy your flight," he sneered, mistaking her quiet composure for submission. What he didn't know, Dr. Amara Carter wasn't just any passenger. She was a storm in a silk blouse. Amara settled into seat 2B, her designer bag resting at her feet like a sleeping panther. Inside it, nestled between Marcus Aurelius's meditations and a tube of gloss, lay her FBI credentials and a Glock 19. At 29, she was the youngest task force leader in the Bureau's counterterrorism division, fresh off a dawn raid that had dismantled a shadowy network funding domestic extremists. This flight wasn't a luxury, it was a mobile fortress for national security intel. When the bright-eyed flight attendant Chloe offered champagne, Amara requested sparkling water with lime, her voice smooth as the Atlantic below. Then came the twist. As the captain strutted past her seat, he accidentally knocked her bag open, sending her book skidding across the aisle. "Clumsy me," he drawled, not bothering to pick it up. Amara's fingers twitched, but she smiled, a razor blade wrapped in velvet. "Funny," she said, retrieving meditations. "Marcus Aurelius wrote about men like you, small gods on tiny thrones." The cabin held its breath. Graves's face darkened, but before he could retort, Chloe intervened with a tray of warm towels, her hands shaking. By the time they landed, Graves would wish he'd never left the cockpit. Because Amara, she didn't just file a complaint. She dismantled his career with a single phone call exposing his history of targeted inconveniences against women and people of color. The airline's PR team spun it as a training issue, but the internet knew better. Viral tweets dubbed her the Silent Storm, and by morning, Graves was grounded not just by his employer, but by the weight of his own arrogance. This wasn't just a story about a racist pilot. It was about what happens when power meets a woman who knows exactly how to unmake it. And Amara, she sipped her sparkling water and watched the sunrise over London, her victory as quiet and as unstoppable as the tide. The suited man's polished Oxfords clicked against the aircraft flooring as he stepped inside, his sharp gaze sweeping the cabin before landing on Amara. "Agent Carter," he said in a clipped British accent, flashing his MI5 credentials. "We've secured the area." The suspect, Amara, nodded toward the cockpit. Just as Callahan emerged, his uniform rumpled. His once proud shoulders slumped. The sight of the armed officers waiting on the tarmac made his knees buckle. But the real twist came next. A petite woman in an Aura Airlines executive blazer pushed past the agents, her heels striking the pavement like gunshots. Richard Callahan. She declared, her voice carrying across the tarmac, "You're hereby terminated for gross misconduct and violation of company ethics." She ripped the golden wings from his chest with a violence that made him flinch. "And before you ask no, you won't be getting your pension." Back in the cabin, passengers pressed against the windows watching as Callahan was led away in cuffs. But the second twist was more subtle. The Marine in 3A stood abruptly blocking the aisle as a young black flight attendant hurried down the galley with tears in her eyes. "Ma'am," he said, handing Amara a note scribbled on a napkin. It read, "He did the same to me last month. Thank you." Amara tucked it into her pocket with the others, each one a stone in the avalanche that would bury Callahan's career. Outside dawn painted the Heathrow runways in gold. The MI5 agent gestured toward the waiting cars. "Your debriefing is ready when you are Agent Carter." But Amara paused, turning back to the plane where Chloe stood in the doorway, gripping a passenger manifest like a lifeline. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, the quiet understanding of women who'd survived the same war in different trenches. As the car door closed behind her, Amara allowed herself one small, satisfied exhale. Some flights ended with champagne. This one ended with justice. The black sedan hadn't even reached the airport perimeter when Callahan's phone began vibrating uncontrollably in his pocket, dozens of notifications flooding in at once. The MI5 agent riding shotgun confiscated it with a gloved hand, but not before Callahan caught a glimpse of the screen. Aura Airlines' racist pilot was already trending on Twitter. A viral video from the CEO in C3 showed his license snapping stunt in crystal clear 4K. Back on the tarmac, Amara watched the sedan disappear, then turned to find Chloe pressing a hot cup of coffee into her hands. "London fog, extra vanilla," the flight attendant said with a tired smile. "Figured you could use it after." She gestured at the chaos unfolding around them, news vans already lining the runway fence, Aura Airlines PR reps sprinting toward the terminal in panic. Then came the twist no one expected. First Officer David Morrison approached, holding out his own wings, the shiny gold pins catching the morning light. "Agent Carter," he said, his voice thick. "I should have reported him years ago. Maybe if I had—" Amara shook her head, closing his fingers back around the wings. "You stood up when it mattered. That's what the Bureau remembers." But the real coup de grace came via text. As Amara slid into the FBI sedan, her phone buzzed with a message from Quantico Callahan's FAA records pulled. Multiple prior complaints buried by union. DOJ opening civil rights investigation. She allowed herself a small, satisfied exhale. This wasn't just about one racist pilot. It was about dismantling the system that had protected him. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Callahan's suburban Chicago home was already surrounded by news crews. His neighbor, an elderly black woman who'd endured years of his snide remarks about her loud grandchildren, stood on her porch with a freshly baked pie, watching the spectacle with a smile. Justice, after all, was best served with a side of poetic irony. The fluorescent lights of the MI5 briefing room hummed overhead as Amara clicked to her final slide, a spider web of offshore accounts linking London bankers to extremist cells. The room full of intelligence officers sat in stunned silence. Then came the first twist. The youngest analyst in the back suddenly gasped. These transactions, they matched the pattern from the Manchester attack. Amara nodded, allowing herself a rare smile. Exactly. Which means we're not just tracking money, we're tracking a blueprint. As the team erupted into action, her phone buzzed with an email from the U.S. Attorney's Office. The subject line made her grip the podium. Callahan plea deal rejected. The body was terser. Judge wants maximum sentence, 8 years. Your testimony required next month. Meanwhile, in a Chicago suburb, Richard Callahan sat in his darkened living room, the glow of his laptop illuminating the hollows of his cheeks. The screen showed his once proud pilot profile on Aura's website, now replaced by a generic silhouette and the words, "No longer with company." Then came the second twist. His doorbell rang. Not reporters this time, but a process server with papers from his ex-wife. The headline screamed through the legal document, "Petition for full custody based on father's moral unfitness." Back in London, Amara stepped out into the crisp evening air, her breath fogging as she dialed a familiar number. "Mom," she said softly, the weight of the day finally touching her voice. "Remember that bully from my high school? The one who said I'd never be more than a diversity hire?" She listened to her mother's indignant huff before continuing. "Turns out, karma flies first class." As she hung up, a black cab pulled up, sent by the MI5 director himself. The driver rolled down the window. "Where to, ma'am?" Amara slid inside the leather seats, sighing beneath her. "Somewhere with very strong bourbon," she said. Then quieter, "and a view of the sunrise." Because while Callahan's world had ended at 37,000 feet, hers was just climbing to altitude. And this time, she wasn't just in first class. She was flying the damn plane. The warehouse at JFK smelled of jet fuel and cardboard, the roar of departing planes shaking the corrugated metal walls every 90 seconds. Callahan stood in a neon vest, sorting donated winter coats when the first twist hit. His supervisor turned out to be a young Haitian immigrant, the same baggage handler he'd once berated for taking too long with first-class luggage. The man didn't gloat, just handed him a scanner with a quiet, "Scan each tag, twice Mr. Callahan." The emphasis on Mr. cut deeper than any insult. Then came the second twist. As he loaded a pallet of emergency medical supplies bound for Puerto Rico, a familiar voice crackled over the warehouse PA. Aura 422, heavy cleared for takeoff runway 4L. His replacement, probably some hotshot rookie he'd trained flying his route to London. His hands shook so badly, he dropped a crate of antibiotics. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Amara Carter sipped tea in a sunlit MI5 conference room reviewing flight manifests. A junior analyst slid a folder across the table inside a photo of Callahan hauling boxes in his neon vest, taken by a tabloid drone. She closed it without comment, but when the analyst left, she allowed herself one small act of mercy, an anonymous donation to the aid group earmarked for worker hazard pay. Justice, after all, wasn't about cruelty. It was about ensuring the weight of consequence matched the depth of the crime. And as another 747 thundered overhead, Callahan finally understood he wasn't being punished for targeting Amara. He was being punished for becoming the kind of man who ever thought he could. The phone trembled in Callahan's hand as his son's voice cut through the silence of his empty apartment. "You humiliated that woman because she was black," Michael said flatly. "Just like you humiliated Jamal at my graduation. Remember, my best friend." The memory hit like a gut punch. Callahan's muttered comment about those people when Michael's black teammate had hugged him too long. Then came the twist. Static crackled as Michael's voice broke. "Mom showed me the FBI agent's testimony. How she let you destroy her ID because she knew." A long pause. "She knew people like you always hang themselves." The line went dead, leaving Callahan staring at his reflection in the dark TV screen, a ghost of the man who'd once worn wings. At the warehouse the next morning, Hector handed him a new assignment, sorting books for a prison literacy program. Callahan froze when he saw the first title, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, the same worn copy Amara had been reading on the flight. The universe, it seemed, had a vicious sense of humor. Meanwhile, across town, Amara sat in a sunlit FBI briefing room, reviewing security footage of Callahan sorting donations. "Any change?" her supervisor asked. She zoomed in on his face, the clenched jaw, the hollow eyes. "Not yet," she said, closing the file. "But the runway's a hell of a mirror." Some falls weren't measured in altitude. They were measured in the quiet moments between a man and his conscience. And Richard Callahan. He was still in freefall. The canned soup congealed in the bowl as Callahan's tears hit the linoleum. Outside his window, the flashing lights of a departing Aura flight pulsed through the blinds, each burst a cruel reminder of the life he'd lost. Then came the twist. His phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line made his blood run cold. Invitation to speak at FAA diversity training. His first instinct was to delete it, but the sender's name gave him pause. Lieutenant David Morrison, Aura Airlines Diversity Initiative. The same co-pilot he'd once belittled for being too soft on trainees. The message was brief. "We need real stories, not lectures. Even yours. Especially yours." Meanwhile, in a DC coffee shop, Amara scrolled through the same FAA bulletin on her phone. Her partner raised an eyebrow. "You think he'll do it?" Amara stirred her coffee slowly. "Doubt it. Pride's a hell of a drug." But then she paused, remembering the raw shame in Callahan's eyes at sentencing. Then again, rock bottom makes surprising architects. Back in Queens, Callahan stared at the email, his finger hovering over reply. The second twist came when his gaze landed on the child's pink coat from the charity warehouse, still draped over a chair where he'd left it, after finding a $20 bill in the pocket, which he'd donated for once not keeping what wasn't his. Something cracked open in his chest. He typed 3 words, "I'll be there." Not for redemption, not even for forgiveness, but because the view from rock bottom was the only one that finally let him see himself clearly. And what he saw was a man who still had choices. The effervescence of Amara's sparkling water seemed to fizz louder in the sudden silence as Captain Callahan loomed over her, his grip tightening on her boarding pass. The other passengers pretended not to stare, their eyes darting away like startled birds, except for one. A silver-haired man in 3A, a retired Marine if his posture was any clue, set down his whiskey and watched with the quiet intensity of someone who recognized a predator circling prey. Amara kept her hand outstretched, her fingers steady. "I believe that's mine, Captain." She said the title dripping with irony. Callahan's jaw twitched. "Funny," he mused, flipping the pass between his fingers like a poker chip. "We had a flagged passenger on this flight, someone with questionable documentation." His gaze slid to her designer bag, then back to her face. "Mind if I take a look inside?" A murmur rippled through the cabin. Amara's pulse spiked, but her voice was glacier calm. "Actually, I do." She leaned forward just enough to lower her tone to a blade's edge. "Unless you'd like to explain to Homeland Security why you're harassing a federal agent carrying classified materials." Callahan froze. The retired Marine in 3A coughed bullshit disguised as a throat clearing. Then the twist, Chloe reappeared her tray, rattling with untouched dessert plates. "Captain," she chirped, wedging herself between them with the oblivious grace of a golden retriever. "The tower's asking for our revised ETA." Callahan's nostrils flared, but he shoved the boarding pass back at Amara. "This isn't over," he muttered loud enough for her alone to hear. Amara smiled sweetly. "Oh, I know." As he stormed off, she unclipped her phone and snapped a photo of his retreating back, then texted it to a contact labeled DHS Oversight with 3 words, Flight 715. Again. Across the aisle, the Marine raised his glass to her in silent salute. Amara returned to her book, but the page blurred. Callahan's mistake wasn't targeting her. It was assuming she'd fight fair. Because when the plane touched down, she wouldn't just walk away. She'd burn his entire playbook to the ground. And the best part, he'd never see it coming. The air in the cabin grew thick enough to choke on as Callahan dangled Amara's license between his fingers like a trophy. She could feel the weight of every passenger's stare. Some curious, some uneasy, the retired Marine in 3A now gripping his armrest like he was one wrong word away from intervening. Then the first twist, a sharp ping, echoed through the cabin as the seatbelt sign flickered back on. Turbulence. The plane gave a sudden lurch, sending Callahan stumbling forward. Amara's hand shot out not to steady him, but to snatch her license back with the precision of a card shark. "Careful, Captain," she said, tucking it into her blazer pocket. "Wouldn't want you to fall." Callahan's face darkened. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Chloe materialized at his elbow, her voice artificially bright. "Captain, the tower's requesting confirmation on our fuel reserves immediately." Her eyes darted to Amara, a silent apology in them. Callahan hesitated, then straightened his uniform with a jerk. "This isn't over," he hissed low enough that only Amara caught it. "Oh, I'm counting on that," she murmured, reaching into her bag. Her fingers brushed the grip of her Glock, not to draw it, but to tap the FBI badge nestled beside it. A reminder to herself of who she was. Then the second twist, as Callahan turned to leave, the silver-haired Marine stood blocking his path. "Problem here, Captain." He rumbled, his voice sandpaper rough. Callahan bristled. "Not unless you're volunteering to verify her credentials too, sir." The Marine didn't flinch. "Funny thing," he said, pulling out his phone. "My son's FBI. Maybe I should ask him what protocol says about interrogating passengers mid-flight." He thumbed the screen deliberately, the glow highlighting the faded tattoo on his wrist, Semper Fi. A beat of silence. Callahan's jaw worked. Then, with a glare that promised retaliation, he shouldered past and vanished into the cockpit. Amara exhaled, her muscles uncoiling. The Marine gave her a nod before returning to his seat, but the battle wasn't won, just postponed. Outside the window, lightning spiderwebbed across the night sky. The storm wasn't just coming. It was here. And Amara, she was the calm at its center. The license creaked ominously in Callahan's grip, the sound like a bone about to snap. Amara's training screamed at her to remain calm, but something primal, something her ancestors had passed down through generations of injustice, rose up in her chest like a wildfire. She leaned forward, her voice a blade wrapped in silk. "Captain, you're holding my identification hostage on a federal flight. That's a felony under 18 U.S. Code, paragraph 242. A hush fell over the cabin. Even the hum of the engines seemed to quiet. Callahan's smirk faltered. He hadn't expected legalese. Then came the first twist. The Marine in 3A stood again, this time holding up his phone. Live streaming to 12,000 followers. "Captain," he lied smoothly, screen tilted toward Callahan. "They're fascinated by your security protocol." Callahan's face purpled. "You can't." "First Amendment, sir." The Marine shot back. "My son's a JAG lawyer. Want his number, Shan." Chloe seized the moment, stepping between them with a stewardess's practiced grace. "Captain, the FAA liaison just called the cockpit, something about an in-flight incident report." Her voice trembled, but her stance didn't. The second twist hit like a gut punch. The plane lurched violently, sending Callahan staggering. Amara's hand shot out, not to help, but to pluck her license from his grasp mid-stumble. "Turbulence," she said sweetly, tucking it into her blazer. "Best return to your seat." Callahan's eyes bulged. He opened his mouth, but the CEO in C3A cut him off. "For Christ's sake, Rick, I'm emailing the board about this. Enjoy early retirement." A chorus of murmurs erupted, other passengers pulling out phones, some filming, others dialing airline complaint lines. The balance of power had shifted, and Callahan knew it. With a snarl, he turned toward the cockpit, but not before Amara delivered the killing blow. She flipped open her wallet, revealing her FBI badge just long enough for him to see. "One more thing, Captain," she said loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. "Expect a call from the Office of Inspector General. They love reviewing discrimination cases." As Callahan slammed the cockpit door, the cabin erupted in applause. The Marine winked at Amara. Chloe brought her a double bourbon. "On the house, doctor." Outside the window, lightning split the sky. But inside, for the first time that flight, Amara smiled. The storm wasn't over, but neither was she. The leather case snapped open with a sound like a gun cocking. Inside, the gold FBI badge caught the cabin lights gleaming like a predator's eye. Callahan's breath hitched. His military training recognized federal authority when he saw it. But the real twist came next. Amara didn't stop there. With her other hand, she pulled out her service weapon, keeping it low and discreet but unmistakable. "Special Agent Carter," she said, her voice colder than the Atlantic below them. "Counterterrorism Division. You just destroyed government property during an active investigation." The Marine in 3A let out a low whistle. The CEO in C3 dropped his whiskey glass. Callahan's mouth worked like a fish out of water. "This is you can't." Oh, I can. Amara took a single step forward, the movement calculated to make him stumble back. That license linked to my security clearance. That flimsy lamination you mocked federal-grade polycarbonate. She tilted her head, watching the blood drain from his face. Tell me, Captain, how many FAA violations do you think they'll find when they tear your service record apart? Then came the second twist. The cockpit door burst open. The co-pilot, a young black woman with lieutenant's stripes, took one look at the scene and immediately radioed ground control. Mayday, mayday, unfit captain, requesting immediate authority transfer per Article 15. Callahan whirled on her. You traitorous— Stand down, sir, the co-pilot snapped her voice steel. I've been logging your behavior since takeoff. She held up her tablet, showing a running incident report, including the racial slurs you muttered after scanning the manifest. The cabin erupted. A woman in 4B stood phone recording. That's going viral in 5 minutes, she announced. Amara never raised her voice. Captain Callahan, you're relieved of command. She nodded to the co-pilot. Lieutenant, you have the con. As the stunned crew escorted Callahan away, his wings literally ripped from his uniform by the furious co-pilot, Amara knelt to pick up the pieces of her license. The Marine crouched beside her. Ma'am, he said quietly, I served 20 years. That was the cleanest takedown I've ever seen. Amara slipped the badge back into her bag. Outside, dawn broke over the Atlantic. Some storms, she thought, needed to be weathered. Others, you flew straight through them. The badge's gleam seemed to burn Callahan's retinas as he stumbled back into a first-class seat, her seat, his knees buckling like a marionette with cut strings. I didn't know, he repeated, sweat beading on his forehead. Amara's smile was arctic. That's the problem, Captain. You assumed. She tapped her badge lightly against her palm. Just like you assumed, that black woman in first class must be a fraud, that her credentials were flimsy, that she wouldn't fight back. Then came the twist no one expected. The cockpit door burst open again. The co-pilot, Lieutenant Daniels, marched out holding an iPad streaming a live video call. On screen, Aura Airlines' CEO, a no-nonsense woman with steel gray hair, glared through the feed. Callahan, she snapped, her voice crackling through the cabin speakers. You're terminated, effective immediately. Hand your wings to Lieutenant Daniels. Callahan's hands shook as he ripped the golden pins from his uniform. But Amara wasn't done. She pulled out her phone, showing him a freshly sent email CC'd to the FAA DOJ and the New York Times. See this. It's your disciplinary record. 3 prior complaints about racial profiling, buried until now. The Marine in 3A stood clapping slowly. One by one, every passenger joined, even the CEO in C3, who added a booming, "Bravo." As Daniels took command of the flight, Amara finally sat back down. Chloe appeared with a new drink, this time top-shelf bourbon. "Compliments of the airline," she whispered, sliding a napkin beneath it. Written on the corner, "Thank you." Outside the window, storm clouds parted. Somewhere over the Atlantic, justice had been served at 30,000 feet, not with a gun or a handcuff, but with a badge, a backbone, and one hell of a reckoning. And Agent Carter. She sipped her drink, watching the sunrise paint the clouds gold. Some flights, after all, were meant to be memorable. The silence in the cabin lasted only a heartbeat before erupting into chaos. A woman in 4D stood clapping slowly, then the entire first-class cabin joined in applause, rolling like thunder. The Marine in 3A gave Amara a crisp salute before pulling out his phone. "My son at JAG's gonna love this," he muttered, already typing furiously. Then came the twist no one expected. Chloe stepped forward, her voice shaking but clear. Agent Carter. She held out not just the torn license in a sickness bag, but a folded napkin with handwritten names and dates. "Other passengers, they wanted you to have this. Flight attendants' records of his behavior. for years. Amara unfolded the napkin. A list of incidents, all women, mostly minorities, all humiliated by Callahan. Her jaw tightened. This just became a pattern investigation. Across the aisle, the CEO in C3 was already on his phone. Greg, cancel the Aura Airlines contract, effective immediately. No, I don't care about the penalty clause. He locked eyes with Amara. Some things, he said loudly, are more important than money, but the real coup de grace came from the cockpit. Over the PA system, Lieutenant Morrison's voice rang out steady now and laced with quiet triumph. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your new captain speaking. We'll be landing at Heathrow in 2 hours. Current airspeed 567 miles per hour. Current altitude 37,000 feet. And current justice served 100%. The cabin erupted in cheers. Even the flight attendants high-fived. Amara sank back into her seat, the weight of the past hour settling over her. Outside the window, the Atlantic glittered under the morning sun, endless, powerful, unstoppable, just like the tide of change she'd set in motion. And as the plane cut through the clouds, one thought burned brighter than the sunrise. Game over Callahan. The cabin lights flickered as Flight 715 pierced through a bank of storm clouds, the turbulence mirroring the emotional upheaval on board. Amara stood in the aisle, her posture radiating calm authority, but her sharp eyes missed nothing, especially not the way Callahan's co-pilot David Morrison kept glancing nervously at the cockpit door. Then came the first twist, a soft ping from the overhead panel. The fasten seatbelt sign lit up. Amara's hand instinctively went to her bag, not for her weapon, but for the folded napkin Chloe had given her. The list of names. The evidence. A voice crackled over the PA. This is your captain speaking, actual Captain Lieutenant Morrison. A ripple of relieved laughter spread through the cabin. We're hitting some rough air, so please stay seated. And to the FBI agent in 2B, a pause. Thank you. The second twist struck like lightning. From the back of first class, an elderly black woman in a vibrant head wrap stood gripping the seats for balance as the plane rocked. Young lady, she called to Amara, her voice rich with generations of wisdom. My granddaughter's a junior at Howard University. When I tell her about this, she shook her head, eyes glistening. She'll know what's possible. Amara felt something unexpected, then a lump in her throat. This wasn't just about taking down a bigot. It was about the invisible threads connecting every person of color who'd ever been made to feel less than. The CEO in C3 saw it too. He pulled out a business card and scrawled something on the back before handing it to Amara. My foundation funds scholarships for minority women in aviation, he said quietly. We'd be honored if you'd speak at our next gala. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Callahan's hands trembled against his knees. The storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest in his mind. Through the door's thin metal, he could hear the murmurs, the occasional burst of laughter, sounds of a world moving on without him. His gaze fell on the family photo tucked by the instruments, his estranged son's high school graduation picture. The boy, no, the young man, had his mother's dark skin and wide, hopeful eyes. A dam broke in Callahan's chest. Back in the cabin, Amara accepted a fresh drink from Chloe this time, with a lime twist, just how she liked it. Outside the window, the storm clouds parted, revealing a sky so clear it hurt to look at. Somewhere over the Atlantic, justice had been served. But more importantly, so had hope. The satellite phone clicked off, but Amara's work wasn't done. She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim tablet, tapping in a security code that made the screen flare to life with FBI insignia. The twist came when Chloe returned, not with more forms, but with a steaming cup of tea. Chamomile, she whispered. For the nerves you won't admit you have. Amara accepted it with genuine gratitude, the warmth seeping through her fingers. Then the second twist unfolded. The Marine from 3A slid into the empty seat beside her. Ma'am, he said quietly, handing her a dog-eared business card. "My son's at Quantico. Fresh recruit. If half his class turns out like you—" He shook his head, emotion roughing up his voice. This country might just be all right. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Morrison finally broke the silence. "Richard," he said, first name no title now. "You know they'll pull your flight recordings, every damn thing you've ever said up here." Callahan didn't respond, but his bloodshot eyes flicked to the voice recorder's blinking light. The truth hit him like a sucker punch. His own cockpit had been gathering evidence against him for years. Back in the cabin, the CEO in C3 was typing furiously on his laptop. The screen showed an email to Aura Airlines' board: terminate our $80 million contract unless they publicly address today's incident. He CC'd the Wall Street Journal. As the plane began its descent, Amara looked out at the first streaks of dawn over London. The reception committee would be waiting, a phalanx of MI5 agents, FBI liaisons, and very likely cameras. But for now, in this quiet moment, she allowed herself one small luxury. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, to remember. Because today hadn't just been about taking down a bully. It had been about every black girl who'd ever been told she didn't belong in first class in any class. And as the wheels touched down with a gentle screech, one thought crystallized. Game changed.